A Charade in Purple, High Orbit of Kepri 4th, 312th Expeditionary Register, Solar Reference, Imperial Compliance, Year 191. Custodian at Arms. Luthien walked in measured steps up the gold-plated aisle of the bridge of the Eternity Anchor. Ahead stood three figures, tall-robed and radiating authority and opulence. He despised all three of them. Stepping onto the observation plinth, he came to a halt, gave the prescribed salute, and waited for acknowledgement, as was custom. He waited longer than necessary, noting with passive interest the way light from the local star reflected from his purple armor mirrored faintly in the polished glass of the viewport. Shipmaster Nithiel Hālgen gave the Astartes a slight nod. Viceroy Luxine Zalaran Valance ignored him entirely, staring down at the planet below, a crystal goblet in her hand, recently filled by a well-robed servitor, now recessed into a shadowed alcove. The third figure, Consul Adjunct Oryx Lysandor, turned at the hem of his cloak and returned the salute. Oryx Lysandor, despite the pompous title, was in reality a sergeant by rank. Luthien's own title of Custodian at Arms derived not from authority, but from the heavy Volkite charger he bore. Still, in the presence of the Viceroy, and to the population of the planet below, there was a decorum that must be maintained. Lysandor spoke first. "Report." Luthien saluted a second time, the angle slightly reduced, as was also custom. "Respects, Lord," he said, not meaning it for the Consul Adjunct, but addressing the Viceroy indirectly. To speak to her directly would have been the height of discourtesy. "The planetary governor requests clarification on whether shipments of goods have been delayed." He paused deliberately, leaving the statement open to interpretation. Lysandor regarded him closely, catching the implication. "Shipments have stopped?" Luthien gave a short nod. "It is my understanding that no ore shipments have arrived in the past 7 days, only local, in-system traffic. In fact," he paused again, measuring how far he could safely go, "the governor was intimating that we had cut supplies ourselves, interdicting shipments as a bargaining strategy." Lysandor turned the information over in silence. His gaze flicked to the Viceroy, who finally deigned to acknowledge the Custodian at Arms. She turned slightly, smiling. "Don't look at me," she said with a lilting laugh. "I have issued no such orders. It is probably warp storms or something equally tedious." Shipmaster Hālgen leaned toward the Vox pit, issuing a noospheric query without speaking. He paused, listening to data only he could hear, then straightened. "The warp is stable locally," he said at last, confirming the report. "No cargo transports have arrived in a week." Lysandor's expression grew thoughtful. "Ask Kerthus to inquire with the local systems." Luthien saluted once more and withdrew, walking back down the golden aisle, quietly relieved to be away from the Viceroy and her idle authority. Luthien passed Palatine Guard Seraphiel, second in command to Lysandor and his mirror image in every way. They could have been twins, their long golden hair combed in precisely the same fashion, armor worn just so, stance a perfect mimicry of form and posture. The only difference was the perpetual sneer Seraphiel wore, a curl of disdain that never seemed to leave his lips. Luthien caught the motion as the man's hand slid possessively across the casing of his gold-plated bolter. He held back the urge to punch him and strode on into the battleship Strategium. 2 Navy armsmen in magenta robes straightened as he passed, their movements stiff with reverence, eyes wide with awe. To the naval crew, Astartes were something close to gods or angels. Luthien had been an Astartes since the early days of the Crusade. He knew full well that he was neither. Within the sanctum, Herald Protector Certhus looked up from his command throne and gave a genuine nod, clearly recognizing that Luthien was neither Lysandor nor Seraphiel. The assembled naval command staff rose as one, saluting or bowing as decorum demanded. Luthien returned the gesture in kind. Upon the hololithic display hung the Kepri system, glowing markers denoting planetary defense forces and the current deployment of the Imperial Navy. Kepri was a minor world, one he had never heard of, nor it seemed had anyone else. The local star did not even appear on most standard navigation charts. In the last 10 years, the Viceroy had brought a dozen worlds to heel, folding them into Imperial compliance with scarcely a shot fired. She was efficient at her trade. Despite his hatred of her arrogance and of her lineage among the ruling imperial families, Luthien had to concede one thing. she understood how to deploy force and favor in equal measure. During their compliance mission, reports had surfaced of a star system supplying its neighbors with trinkets and refined goods in exchange for machinery and equally exotic materials. And so they had arrived in force to bring the errant system into the Imperial fold. Things had become complicated. Khepri 4 and Khepri 3 were both human worlds, old colonies established during the Golden Age by massive space barges. During the Dark Age, the Mechanicus had maintained limited contact, and the local populations were not ignorant of the Imperium or its expansion. Save for a few isolated rebel factions, resistance to Imperial rule had been minimal. The true obstruction was Khepri II, a Xenos world in the same system. Spacefaring, as capable as its neighbors, and deeply enmeshed in local trade, art, and culture. The inhabitants, though broadly humanoid, were more plant than mammal. This alone was not unprecedented. The Imperium had incorporated several hundred lesser sentient species deemed non-threatening, often relocating them from major trade routes or imposing a token garrison. These beings, derisively referred to in some administratum records as nymphs, were also low-level psychers. Ordinarily, such a matter would have been resolved with orbital bombardment and recolonization. However, the local governor had objected. More troubling still, the administratum classified their psychic capacity as negligible, citing their plant-based biology as a hard limit on further development. Vicereal chirurgeon Valerius Vethrix, their own apothecary, had personally tested the creatures, spending long periods on both Khepri Teku and Khepri 4, where humans and Xenos lived side by side. He was adamant the beings could not pose a threat. It made matters far more difficult. Negotiations had dragged on for weeks. Consul Adjunct Aurex Lysandor had repeatedly pressed for decisive action, only to be stayed by the Viceroy, who, pointedly, refused to involve the Astartes in what she insisted were diplomatic concerns. Luthien found that omission far more troubling than any Xenos presence. Luthien leaned toward the display. Most of the fleet was positioned around Khepri 4th. At a glance, it resembled an investment, but in truth, it was a convenient anchor. The planet was the most populous in the system and lay closest to the local translation point. If enforcement became necessary, it would require minimal energy to impose. He breathed out slowly. Lysandor requests information on the shipping times of the merchant fleet, he said, his voice carefully apologetic. The consul adjunct could easily have spoken over the squad vox. There was no need to send him like an errand servitor. Kerthus straightened, shifting his cloak aside and setting down a crystal glass of bubbling pink liquid upon a silver platter. He tapped at the console before him, then gestured to his own display as if Luthien could see it. "I am already ahead of our illustrious consul adjunct," Kerthus said dryly. "No shipments for 8 standard days. More concerning still," he adjusted the projection, "overall void traffic has been declining for at least 3 months. He leaned forward, waving away a servitor holding an ornamental fan. "I checked the neighboring systems. There's a clear interruption in trade, at least locally. See here," he indicated a rising curve, a brief spike, then a steady collapse. Luthien rubbed the 3 steel pins set into his forehead, a habitual gesture when troubled. "Do we have any indication why? Anything moving through the networks?" Kerthus was the squad's vox adept, meticulous to the point of obsession where communications were concerned. He frowned. "We are receiving traffic," he said slowly, much of it encoded. "However, standard Imperial channels appear nominal. General chatter as a whole has dropped to near silence." He folded his hands together. "As to why, that is open to interpretation." Luthien nodded. They had all sensed it in recent weeks. Unmarked vessels arriving under Imperial seal, new commissars embedded among the fleet, 3 battleships reassigned to deal with Xenos pirates, none of which had responded to astropathic communication since departure. The prevailing assumption was a new border campaign, perhaps the emergence of another Xenos threat. Yet intelligence reports showed nothing, and that, Luthien reflected, was what troubled him most. An adept approached from the astropathic relay, his steps hurried, his expression tight with agitation. He handed over a data parchment sealed with the Imperial sigil. Kerthus received it with the obligatory salute, breaking the seal with his signet ring. Luthien ignored the exchange, his attention fixed on the tactical display. Only now did he notice the pattern clearly. The ships clustered with the main fleet were all Old Guard fleet craft, Terran-crewed, venerable hulls heavy with honors. Those scattered in smaller groupings across the rest of the system were crewed almost entirely by non-Terrans from Chemos. Funny. Even after 3 centuries of unity, the divisions lingered, unspoken, unacknowledged, yet ever present. Carthus spoke, drawing his attention. "We are ordered to alert status," he said simply. "Alert for what?" Luthien asked. Carthus reached for his glass, draining it before wiping the residue from his lips. "Honestly, brother, I have no idea, but the order bears the Emperor's seal." Luthien stepped closer, taking the offered parchment. It was still warm from the press, the paper faintly damp with perfumed oils. He read it once, then again. All forces are to maintain alert status. Interdiction doctrine in effect. Interdiction doctrine, he repeated. That means all further warp translations are to be regarded as suspect. We haven't invoked this since the Golden Rebellion. Carthus rose from his throne. Yes, it assumes enemy forces may be operating with stolen codes, impersonating Imperial vessels. Luthien handed the parchment back. So what do you think? Scrap code mimicry? Shape-shifting Xenos? Carthus laughed softly. Emperor knows, but I doubt they would bother with a system like this. Backwater, end of nowhere. He turned toward the doors. All the same, protocol demands we report it. Luthien followed, smiling faintly. It did sound more like an internal security issue than anything truly dangerous. As they stepped back onto the bridge, he saw Viceroy Valance and Consul Adjunct Lysander locked in conversation with several dignitaries from the diplomatic corps and the militarum. A commissar stood nearby, one hand resting on the grip of his bolt pistol. Shipmaster Hālgen had resumed his throne, issuing quiet orders to the bridge crew. Carthus approached and saluted, waiting for permission to speak. When it was granted, he said, "We have received a communication." Luxine cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Yes, we are aware. Interdiction doctrine." Carthus frowned, glancing down at the parchment in his hand, the seal only just broken. His gaze shifted as he noticed Palatine Guard Seraphiel standing nearby, holding a second data parchment in his gauntlet. Luthien extended a hand. Seraphiel gripped it tightly, sneering, but Carthus, grinning faintly, tapped the Palatine Guard on the breastplate and took the document himself, passing it to Luthien. Luthien unrolled it. Carthus raised his own beside it. The orders were identical. "Where did this come from?" Carthus asked quietly. Lysander replied, "It arrived via the Astartes communications array." Carthus studied the imperial seal on his own order, then the second. This one bore additional insignia, authorized by the War Master himself. He lowered the parchment slowly. 2 identical orders, he said, from 2 separate commands, issued simultaneously. Luthien felt a tightening in his chest. The chain of command was inviolate. This was unusual, to say the least. So why 2 orders? Lysander shook his head. No idea. The Viceroy fixed them with a hard stare. "You know what Imperial administration is like," she said coldly. Luthien did not reply, but the unease remained. Luthien rubbed at the stud set into his forehead. "Are we at war? We are the Imperium. We are always at war," Seraphiel snapped. "That's not what I meant, and you know it," Luthien shot back. Carthus interjected calmly. "Something is happening, even if it is only a communications fault." Shipmaster Hālgen spoke from the command throne. "Eternity Anchor is on standby alert status. Weapons uncharged, but all crews are at their stations." He tapped a control rune and a hololithic projection flared into being, a miniature echo of the Strategium display. "I have placed the fleet on standby and ordered the inner squadrons to tighten formation. If anything translates into the system beyond the primary point, we will have overlapping fire arcs." "Good," Lysander said. "Transmit to planetfall. Order auxiliaries to begin security sweeps and have Navis Astra forces prepare for embarkation. No sense leaving troops on the surface if this turns into a fleet action." Luthien listened as the orders propagated through the Voxnet. Something tugged at his thoughts. A sense of misalignment. Something was wrong, but he could not yet see where the fracture lay. Heavy footsteps sounded along the golden aisle. He turned, smiling despite himself. "You're missing all the fun," he said to the last member of the squad. Vicereal Chirurgian Valerius Vethrix gave a mocking salute as he strode onto the bridge plinth, his cloak billowing behind him. His white armor gleamed beneath the lumina rays, apothecarian sigils etched in gold and silver across his battle plate. "I saw the alert," Valerius said. "What's the ailment?" "Nothing for a pox doctor," Seraphiel sneered. He lost the expression immediately when Valerius did not slow. Seraphiel stepped aside just in time to avoid collision, nearly tripping over a deckhand in the process. He almost struck the mortal in irritation, but Valerius caught his wrist and pressed his armored gauntlet lightly to the man's breastplate in a jesting rebuke. The apothecary then gave an exaggerated bowing salute. Lysander returned it with a wan smile. "How was your trip?" the consul adjunct asked. Valerius was already being shown the conflicting parchments. "It went precisely as expected. The nymph biology has now been mapped for the 3rd time. I sincerely hope the administratum does not require a 4th. I have every intention of being otherwise occupied that day." "I meant your medical sweeps," Lysander clarified. "Oh, the fleet is in excellent health. I would recommend the maintenance crews take an hour's walk each cycle, and everyone could benefit from more fruit in their diet. But beyond that," he trailed off, tapping both seals with one finger. "2 orders, certainly." The viceroy, clearly displeased by the shift in attention, spoke sharply. "We were considering how best to reply, brother apothecary." Valerius glanced at Luthien and winked theatrically. Then he plucked both parchments from their respective hands and returned one to the viceroy and the other to the consul adjunct. "Isn't it obvious?" he said lightly. "Reply to both." Valerius's presence eased some of the tension on the bridge, but the deck crew still looked up warily, while the bridge officers made a deliberate show of being busy. Luthien suspected it was to avoid being drawn into whatever complex situation was unfolding. An adjutant approached the shipmaster with a message tablet. Luthien noticed the man's expression tighten with concern. The adept beside him, wearing the tunic and sigils of the fleet astropathic relay, clearly already knew what the message contained and looked equally troubled. Luthien considered intervening, but a second adept approached Certhus. Bowing slightly, he whispered into the Vox adept's ear. Certhus's expression darkened. He moved immediately toward the Vox pit. Luthien followed. Certhus seated himself upon the vacated Vox throne and lifted the receiver as the adjutant affixed a record trell to replay the message. A scribe handed him a transcript pad so he could read while listening. Catching sight of Luthien, Certhus signaled him toward a secondary receiver. Luthien stepped into the pit and fitted the device over his ear. The message was already halfway through. He waited for it to conclude, then listened again from the beginning. It was a point-to-point astropathic transmission between Khepri IV's relay and the planetary governor's palace. A lumen blinked on the Vox console. Luthien was no Vox specialist, but he had spent enough time with Certhus to recognize the indicator, encrypted traffic. A laughable attempt at secrecy with the flagship of the compliance fleet in orbit. The decoding was already being handled automatically by the ship's superior imperial cogitators. The message repeated, Astropathic Relay. Astropath Adjutant Publius Ignatius Scrofa to Agrippa Laetorius Columbanus, Planetary Governor-elect of Khepri IV. Message received from the Astropathic Relay on Campona Arpinum. Imperial forces are fighting. Guard yourself. Message ends. Luthien listened a third time. Certhus handed him the transcript. The words matched exactly. Luthien set the receiver down. Could this be a translation error in the encryption protocol? Certhus rested his own receiver against his chin, thinking, it is astropathic communication. Misinterpretation is always possible, but unlikely. They rose together and returned to the bridge deck. Shipmaster Hālgen was speaking quietly to the viceroy. Their transhuman hearing caught the end of it. But I don't see how. Either way, it makes no sense, Hālgen was saying. Valence turned slightly, her smile fixed but no longer reaching her eyes. Where is the Tertius Chalice? She asked softly. Hālgen glanced toward Consul Adjunct Lysander, who stood beside Palatine Guard Seraphiel, transcribing a response to the duplicated orders. Its orbit will bring it under our guns in 10 minutes, my lady. The viceroy nodded, her expression unchanged. Seeing the two Astartes watching her, she raised her voice lightly. Anything of concern? She asked. You both look disturbed. Hālgen nodded awkwardly and returned to his throne. Certhus smiled, affecting a jovial air. Something of potential interest via the astropathic relay, he said casually. At his side, his hand formed a brief battle sign. Luthien read it instantly. Warn the others. He broke away, walking calmly without haste, toward his commander. Valerius was selecting choice grapes from a servant's bowl while exchanging idle commentary with a remembrancer. He noticed Luthien passing, and his smile faded slightly as he recognized the battle sign. The apothecary bowed politely to his companion, took half the bowl in one hand, and fell into step beside the custodian at arms. As they walked, Certhus addressed the viceroy. We intercepted a transmission over the secure ether. Governor Columbanus was contacted from Campona Arpinum. Valence narrowed her eyes in recognition. One of the Colosseum Mandate worlds, she said, brought into compliance some 10 years ago. She shrugged. Doubtless a new trade opportunity for the governor. Certhus pursed his lips and handed her the transcript. Valence accepted it, her smile unbroken, though her posture betrayed sudden attention. Astartes are fighting, she read aloud, then smiled wider. Fighting whom exactly? She straightened her robes and touched her silver-plated tiara. Why would a minor trade world contact a regional governor with such an odd statement? Certhus inclined his head respectfully. Unknown, my lady. I am merely the bearer of news. His eyes flicked toward the weapons pit. Gunnery officers were moving, not urgently but deliberately, bringing targeting solutions online. He followed their gaze to the viewport. The Emperor's children cruiser Tertius Chalice was cresting the planetary horizon below in its slow orbital ascent, sunlight spilling across its gilded purple hull. Certhus maintained his smile as he backed away, moving with casual care toward the Vox Cogitator bank. Clearly the shipmaster and the viceroy were acting on something, and he intended to find whatever message Hālgen had received. He jacked his noospheric cable into the array and scrolled the communication network, dropping into the command channel logs. Nothing. He opened the clear Vox intercept, routine reports of suspected rebel groups on the planet below, nothing concerning fleet movement. Then he found it. Through the ambassadorial communication array, a message encrypted for shipmaster Nithiel Hālgen. Eyes only, secured by biometric seal. The packet required not only the shipmaster's signet ring, but retinal pattern and full physiological scan. Unbreakable, or so it claimed. The Emperor's children had always loved puzzles as a way of passing time, and biometric encryption was among the simplest, used mostly by fools who believed machines could replace ingenuity. Certhus pulled up a log of every scan conducted by Apothecary Vethrix since their assignment to the fleet. The retinal imprint came from a prism device. The signet was standard issue, one of only 231 variants used by Legion serfs. 30 seconds later, he was reading the message. His jaw tightened, his hand twitched, aware of how far his gauntlet rested from his holster. Behind him on the bridge, Viceroy Valence watched him with the same pleasant smile she had worn all day. Her hand rested casually within the folds of her robe as she glanced toward the approaching silhouette of the Tertius Chalice. The faint hum of her disruptor pistol powering up was lost beneath the bustle of the bridge. In the strategium, Valerius sealed the hatch with a soft hiss. Seraphiel and Lysandor were bent over the strategic display, ships sliding into new formations across the hololith. The duplicated message lay on the table, unsent. Luthien stood beside them, relaying what Certhus had intercepted. The news of Astartes fighting unsettled them all. Valerius regarded the three warriors, while the mortal crew pretended not to notice the post-humans in their midst. "What does it mean by targeting our ship?" Lysandor asked. Seraphiel folded his arms, his expression darker than usual. Luxine Valence will not fire on an Emperor's children vessel. And after the message we all read, Astartes fighting, it makes strategic sense to cover the only Astartes ship in system, especially with interdiction doctrine active. "You're too trusting," Luthien replied. "But fighting who?" Lysandor pressed. "And why would Campona Arpinum contact the governor instead of us? We are the compliance fleet." "The interdiction order explains that," Seraphiel said. "It isn't really Astartes fighting. That makes no sense. Someone is using Astartes identity codes in holofields. That's the only explanation." Lysandor clenched his fist against the strategium table. "And who would do that?" "Separatists. Xenos. Who cares?" Seraphiel replied. The point is, Columbanus is clearly aligned with whoever it is. We arrest him, hang him from the hull in a void suit with a puncture. He'll talk. We can't arrest a planetary governor on a single message, Luthien warned. We don't have that authority, and voiding prisoners was prohibited under compliance protocols. We are Astartes, Seraphiel snapped. We are the law. Valerius popped a grape into his mouth and spoke around it. No one is getting voided. And Brother Luthien is correct, though I disagree with his taste in armor polish. We are not Arbites. We're here to guard the Viceroy, a symbolic projection of imperial power. Arresting a governor is her prerogative. We should bring this to Valence, Lysander said. And yet we skulk in the strategium, Brother Consul Adjunct, Valerius replied lightly, selecting another grape. I wonder why. Lysander tapped the table with his index finger. Because something doesn't feel right. Trade is slowing, communications are erratic, something is unfolding. The aft hatch opened. An engine servitor technician stumbled into the chamber, loose tunic soaked with sweat, golden sash smeared with grease. The mortal staff officers glanced up, then quickly looked away, as if his disarray might contaminate their own uniforms. The man looked between each of the Emperor's children in turn, visibly trembling. Lysander assessed him coldly. This is the strategium, he said. Engineering is 7 decks down and aft. Walk until it becomes unbearable to stand. The man snapped a crisp salute. I came with a request for Medicaid. Valerius looked up with interest. Seraphiel rested a hand on his gilded bolter. 3 decks forward. Stop when you smell disinfectant and perfume. The man hesitated. I was told only an Astartes apothecary could help, Lord. Seraphiel glanced at Valerius, then back to the man. I'm afraid Brother Vicereal Chirurgian Vithrix has already cleaned his armor this cycle. Find another healer who doesn't mind rolling in grease. Now leave. We are in conclave. The man swallowed, his lip trembling. Valerius set down the bowl, selecting one final grape. Don't worry about him, Valerius said casually. He never learned manners. His mother was too busy on the docks to teach him to read. He stepped forward, narrowly avoiding a swipe from Seraphiel. Turning to Lysander, he inclined his head. Please keep me informed, Consul Adjunct. I'm sure you can manage the situation. He nodded to Luthien and followed the engineer out, ducking low to fit his white armor through the hatch, hitching his cloak aside so it wouldn't drag across the deck. Luthien watched the hatch seal behind the apothecary, then turned back to Lysander, who was studying the ship deployments. Perhaps you should warn the Tertius Chalice, he said. Already done, Lysander replied, his finger still tapping against the display. On the hololith, the primary fleet had shifted into full battle formation. The vessels orbiting Kepri 1, 2, and 3 were arranging themselves in echelon deployment. Any ingress into the system would now be met by overlapping lance batteries, while dispersal weapons would find fewer clustered targets. Shipmaster Hālgen clearly knew his void warfare. Interdiction doctrine, Luthien murmured. It assumes infiltration. The enemy could already be here. Seraphiel replied with confidence. I oversee all void troop deployments, fleet auxiliaries, and planetary force integration. If someone were attempting to subvert our forces, I would know. There is nothing. On the hololith, the Tertius Chalice drifted closer beneath the guns of the flagship. No firing orders had yet been issued. Seraphiel spoke again. Our ship will be in range in 2 minutes. Whatever you intend to do to defuse this situation, it may be time. Lysander glanced at Seraphiel, who had already readied his bolter, then at Luthien, who reluctantly connected the charging cable to his Volkite charger. Lysander exhaled slowly and plucked a grape from the bowl Valerius had left behind. Whatever the solution, brothers, he said quietly, it won't be fixed with bullets. The crack of gunfire from the bridge cut him off. The 3 Emperor's children reacted instantly. They raced to the hatch, bursting onto the bridge. Luthien mind raced as he saw the state of the bridge, so peaceful before, not a sight of chaos. Carthus lay on the deck, his armor scored and punctured by disruptor and las-round impacts. He was reaching for his pistol. Viceroy Luxine Valence stood on the observation plinth, pistol raised, her aim unwavering on the herald protector. Her 2 personal guards, resplendent in gold armor reinforced with cataphractii plate embossed in silver and filigree, lay dead at her feet. One had taken a bolt round through the center of his faceplate. The other had been hit 3 times in the abdomen, a 4th round tearing through his neck. Crew and Void armsmen stood or crouched in confusion, weapons half raised, some aimed at the wounded Astartes, others at the Viceroy, a few at each other. A select number of novice Astra armsmen had their weapons trained on a 3rd figure. Shipmaster Hālgengas stood before his throne, blood soaking into the rich drapery beneath him. One arm hung uselessly at his side. His pistol was leveled directly at Valence's head. Seraphiel moved first, bolter snapping toward the armsmen by the doors. They dropped their weapons instantly. He pivoted, sighting on the Viceroy. Lysander drew his bolt pistol and ignited his power sword, but did not advance. Luthien leveled his Volkite charger into the bridge. The rising whine of its charging coils silenced the room. Weapons clattered to the deck. Only Hālgen kept his pistol raised. "Don't be a fool," Valence snapped. "You're the fool," Hālgen replied. "Drop it," Seraphiel growled. Lysander stepped forward. "Everyone calm. What is the cause of this hostility?" Caerthus pushed himself upright, slapping a sealant patch over the smoking rent in his armor. "Hālgen received an administratum order," he said through clenched teeth. "Cleverly routed, or I would have intercepted it earlier." He reached instinctively for his pistol. Guards twitched toward fallen weapons. Caerthus stopped, clutching his wounded arm. "Orders from the Emperor," he gasped. "The Tertius Chalice is designated a traitor vessel, and so are we." Lysander took another step forward. Valence swung her pistol toward him. Hālgen did not lower his aim. "We were ordered to fire on your ship," he said. "I refused." "Traitor," Valence said softly, smiling. "The orders are from the Emperor of mankind. Refusing them is treason. All these years I thought I knew you, and all this time you were a coward." Hālgen spat blood onto the carpet. "The order did not come through the correct chain of command," he rasped. Luthien saw now that it wasn't just Hālgen's arm. There was a dark stain spreading at his side. "Luxine," Hālgen continued, breathing hard. "We've served together for 20 years of compliance. You know me. Trust me. We must obey the chain of command." Valence's pistol did not waver. Lysander reached Hālgen's side, gently lowering the man's weapon, guiding him toward the throne. He signaled for Medicae while raising his own pistol at the Viceroy. "We are under interdiction doctrine," Lysander said evenly. "Spurious communications are exactly what we are meant to guard against." The gunnery captain slowly raised a trembling hand. "Lords, my lady, the Tertius Chalice is in range." Luthien swung his Volkite toward the gunnery pit. Half the crew immediately abandoned their stations with hands raised. The rest remained, frozen in place. A servitor drifted forward bearing a silver tray with crystal glasses and grapes. The gunnery captain waved it away, pale and ready to die. Valence broke the silence. "Stand down," she said, lowering her pistol. "But if this proves to be a valid order," her gaze swept the bridge and the Astartes, "I will personally ensure your families are reassigned to a forge world." Lysander nodded once. "Acceptable, Viceroy Valence. After this mission, I could use the rest." Seraphiel lowered his bolter and moved to Caerthus's side, pulling out a med pack as other medtechs rushed in. The guards retrieved their weapons and resumed their posts, uncertain what exactly they were guarding. Luthien cut power to his Volkite charger and let it hang at his side. A shadow rolled across the bridge as the immense mass of the Tertius Chalice drifted past the prow of the flagship, unharmed. Its void shields caught the light of the local star, scattering it into an oily prism of color. Lysander took a moment to watch the cruiser slide clear of the firing line, then turned back to Valence. "The shipmaster has a point," he said evenly. "We have known each other for years. Why so quick to condemn us?" Valence met his gaze, her expression one of pure imperial authority. "The orders of the Emperor are absolute." Lysander shook his head. "I always knew you were rigid in protocol, but you sound like a zealot. I do not believe the Emperor requires or approves of zealotry in his officers." Valence turned away, facing the great viewport. "What would you know?" she replied coolly. "The Emperor made you angels. I doubt you even notice the humans you stride over anymore." Seraphiel, helping Caerthus to his feet, shot her a hard glance. "We are not angels," he said, "and the Emperor is no god." The Viceroy made a soft sound of dismissal without looking back. Lord Aurelian would disagree. Seraphiel released Caerthus, who waved him away and tested his weight on his wounded leg. And Lorgar was punished for saying so, Seraphiel replied. Valance did not answer. She studied the planet below for a long moment, then spoke again. How are you, Kerthus? You have my apology. Serthus straightened, flexing the fingers of his injured arm. Well enough, my lady, and thank you for choosing a disruptor. A plasma pistol might have caused complications. She smiled faintly. I will remember that, should I ever have to confront a disobedient Astartes again. Don't, Serthus replied flatly. The only reason you landed that shot is because I was busy killing your decorative guards. She glanced down at the bodies. Yes, expensive too. She nodded to a staff officer. Have the deck cleaned. Luthien shook his head. He had known the Viceroy possessed a cold streak, but her dismissiveness still appalled him. He knelt beside Hālgen, examining the shipmaster's wound. It was deep, but no vital organs had been struck. You're lucky, Luthien said. Hālgen smiled weakly. Don't be. If the orders had come through proper channels, I would have fired on your ship. Luthien nodded. Well, thank you for being stubborn. Hālgen chuckled through the pain as the med patch took hold and his breathing eased. A servitor began binding his arm. An officer from the Strategium approached, pausing only briefly as the fallen guards were dragged away and wounded armsmen escorted toward the Medicae Bay. He stopped beside the throne, waiting. Hālgen noticed him and sighed. There's a time for decorum, he said, taking the message. He unsealed it with his signet ring, allowing the biometric rites to clear the cipher, then unrolled the parchment. His face went gray. Then he smiled. He handed it to Lysandor. The consul adjunct read it, his expression tightening despite his attempt at composure. Valance snatched it from his grasp. She scanned the text, gave a short, humorless laugh, then tossed it to the deck and returned to the viewport, arms clasped behind her back. Luthien looked between them. Lysandor spoke quietly. It's an order to destroy the Tertius Chalice, and to execute the 5 of us. Luthien swallowed. Kerthus laughed aloud. He had retrieved the message, read it, and now rolled it neatly before setting it on the Vox shelf. It's from the War Master, he said dryly. Apparently we're loyalists, though it fails to specify who exactly we are meant to be loyal to. The bridge fell silent as his laughter faded. Seraphiel rested his palm on his bolter. Any takers? Hālgen flexed his injured arm. Still not through official channels. Luthien looked to Kerthus. You should attend the Medicae Bay and have those wounds properly treated. He then turned and bowed to the shipmaster. Shipmaster Hālgen, I respectfully request you do the same. Hālgen shifted in his throne, drawing the blood-soaked silk drapery aside to expose cleaner fabric beneath. At this moment, Herald Protector, my place is here. Serthus nodded. I'm still on my feet, Luthien, and I agree with the shipmaster's sentiment. An adept from the Vox pit raised a hand in signal. Kerthus inclined his head to both men and moved to investigate. He leaned over the shoulder of the Vox operator. Sweat soaked through her uniform, and her hands trembled with stress. Serthus placed a reassuring gauntlet on her shoulder. Just do what's in front of you, he said quietly. Let those in authority worry about the consequences. The Vox adept lowered her head and passed him the transcript. Serthus read it, then took the receiver, selected the correct reel, and replayed the transmission at triple speed. He set the device down, patted the adept's shoulder once more, and returned to the bridge with the still damp transcript in hand, unsealed. Everyone looked to him. Well, Herald Protector? The Viceroy asked, addressing him as though she had not attempted to kill him moments earlier. Kerthus hesitated, glanced at Lysandor, then handed the transcript to the consul adjunct, pointedly ignoring Valance's scowl. The Viceroy stepped off the plinth, but Seraphiel moved to block her, not threatening, simply placing his armored bulk in her path. Lysandor read the orders, his expression tightening with layered emotion. Is the insignia sanctified? He asked. Kerthus nodded. The astropathic relay received the correct psychic iteration concurrent with administratum confirmation. He raised his uninjured hand. It's as authentic as it can be. Under normal circumstances, I would suspect nothing. Valance watched closely, her hand shifting slightly. Seraphiel's gauntlet slid toward his gold-plated bolter. She stopped, offered a disarming smile, and folded her arms. Seraphiel returned the smile with a polite nod. Lysandor reread the message, then gave a short, humorless snort. He turned toward the Viceroy, casting a glance at Hālgen. "Apparently," he said evenly, "Viceroy Luxine Zalaran Valance is designated a loyalist. We are ordered to destroy her and the entire compliance fleet." Valance went pale. The color drained from her lips. "So now I'm the loyalist?" From the throne, Hālgen spoke. "And how exactly do they expect you to destroy the compliance fleet?" He gestured toward the viewport. "The Tertius Chalice is a fine ship with a loyal crew, but against my fleet?" He sounded genuinely curious. Seraphiel glanced back at Lysandor. "I'm fine with killing Luxine. Just give the word." Lysandor shook his head, lifting the parchment. "You want the interesting part? This order is from Azek Aramen." Luthien placed one boot on the plinth and rested his Volkite charger across his knee as he leaned forward. "Aramen is Thousand Sons. Why is he issuing execution orders to the Emperor's children?" Seraphiel frowned. "And why is Aramen issuing kill orders at all? That should come from Magnus the Red." Lysandor rolled the parchment in his fist. "What in the Emperor's name is happening?" Luthien tapped the brass muzzle of his Volkite charger, producing a soft bell-like ring. "So, if we're being accused of loyalty, and the Viceroy is being accused of loyalty, what's on the other side of that coin?" They all looked at him. No one answered. A low klaxon sounded from the Auspex pit. Normally it wouldn't have been audible on the bridge, but the silence was cathedral deep. Movement rippled across the platform. At the same moment, the ship's astropath leaned out from his observation dome. "Translation incoming," he intoned. The Vox captain, sporting a fresh black eye, shouted over him, voice cracking with adrenaline. "Confirmed translation point forming. Sending coordinates to gunnery." "Relay to the fleet," Hālgen ordered. Valance peered through the viewport, searching for the flare. "Good," she murmured. "Maybe someone can finally tell us what in Terra's name is happening out there." The Astartes moved to the plinth beside her, staring into the void. Space tore open. Reality folded. A ship emerged from the warp. Seraphiel gave a hollow laugh. "Ah, now we know why the Thousand Sons are sending communications into this system." A heavy cruiser slid fully into real space, its brilliant red livery marking it unmistakably as 15 Legion. In the lower decks, within a low-roofed service walkway, one of the passages intended for ship-based automata and servitors rather than crew, Valerius knelt beside the engine seer, careful not to scrape his white-plated armor against the cramped bulkheads. He leaned forward, extending a bio-auspex toward the object. The engine seer wiped dry lips with the back of his hand. "As you see, Lord," he said, "I was carrying out routine maintenance. No one comes through these ducts. They're general service access only. I was tracing a fault on the EA-35 carrier cable and..." He swallowed. "I found this." The Vicereal Chirurgeon studied the device. It was egg-shaped. The lower half was dull brass, the upper plasteel. Inside, a greenish fluid churned with slow yellow clouds. A bioinfuser was bonded to its core, masking its signature with null return relays that would cause any standard Auspex sweep to register empty space. "Clever work," Valerius murmured. He glanced around the passage. Pipes and conduits crowded every surface. "All these lines converge here," he said. "Why this junction? Air filtration? Water?" The engine seer rubbed stubble along his jaw. "It's not a primary node, but it's where most secondary systems cross. That pipe feeds the distillation circuit. That one," he pointed, "belongs to the atmospheric recycling array. It links to all 6 primary pumps." He gestured toward a bundled mass of hoses as thick as an Astartes arm. "Those are auxiliary air feeds to the hangar bays, security decks, and reserve circulation lines." Valerius nodded slowly. "There are contamination safeguards, surely? Auto-isolation protocols?" "Yes, Lord, but..." The engine seer pointed toward a bulkhead barely 10 feet away. "All detection systems are beyond that barrier. This section lies outside their coverage." He patted the nearest pipe. "If this device activates, it floods the ship, whatever it carries." Valerius checked his scan and slipped the Auspex back into his belt. He tapped the glass casing. "Viral clade. Same strain carried aboard the compliance fleet, likely siphoned from the onboard virus munitions." He indicated the base. "There's no initiator. No timer, no detonator. It must be remotely triggered." The engine seer shook his head. "And if we move it?" Valerius shook his own. "No pressure or motion sensors, but I suspect proximity gating. It may require continuous signal presence." He shrugged, his pauldron scraping an overhead brace. I'd rather not test that theory. He stepped back from the device. Can this section be sealed? The engine seer hesitated, not without compromising primary life support. Reserve tanks won't sustain the crew. Valerius nodded. Well, convenient that we have a planet to evacuate toward. He rose to his full height. Why bring this to me? The engine seer shifted uneasily. The ship has felt wrong lately. New commissars, interrogations, arrests on the lower decks, key officers replaced. He bowed his head. You are an angel of the Emperor. There was no one else I could trust. Valerius turned toward the hatch and placed a heavy gauntlet on the man's shoulder. The grip was firm, slightly too firm. You did well, engine seer. The man winced under the pressure. Potitus, Lord. Potitus Pompilius Pyrovox, engine seer 3rd class. My family has served the Emperor's children for 5 generations aboard the Eternity Anchor. Valerius smiled faintly. I believe I knew your great-great-grandfather. Tall man, played the lute. Pyrovox blinked in surprise. The lute is still a family heirloom, Lord. Valerius nodded. He glanced once more at the device, then guided Pyrovox through the hatch, sealing it behind them. He led the engine seer down the passage in silence until they reached the access balcony overlooking Hangar Bay 3. Below, crew were loading a shuttle bound for Kepri 4, scheduled to collect naval voidsmen from the surface. Valerius stopped at the rail. Pyrovox stood beside him, swallowing hard. Valerius removed his hand from the man's shoulder and drew a gold-plated blade from his belt, clearly ceremonial. Pyrovox stiffened. Valerius unscrewed the hilt, inverted it, and allowed a small device to drop into his palm. He handed it over. Security emitter. It will grant you passage anywhere Emperor's Children authority applies. The device was compact but heavy, bearing the Legion's winged claw sigil. Valerius spoke quietly. There is a transport departing Kepri 4 within the hour from Starport Primus Concilius. This shuttle will take you there. The transport carries diplomatic papers and tithe consignments. Be aboard when it leaves. Pyrovox looked up. And then? Valerius smiled. Find a Legion apothecary. Give him that. He nodded toward the device. It contains all my reports to this moment. Whatever happens, someone must know what occurred here. Pyrovox bowed deeply and hurried down toward the shuttle. Void armsmen raised their weapons as he approached, then snapped to attention as their helm displays confirmed the siphon code. Valerius watched until the shuttle departed. Beyond the atmospheric shield, reality tore open and another vessel emerged from the warp. Valerius clenched his jaw. Things were becoming complicated. He turned on his heel and made for the bridge. On the bridge, they could all see something was wrong. Very wrong. Hail her, ordered Shipmaster Hālgen. The bridge erupted into noise once more, called reports, shouted orders, the Vox pit alive with transmitted and received fleet traffic. Lysander stood beside Viceroy Valance, both of them masking their concern as they watched the warship pull clear of the translation point. Seraphiel and Kerthus remained by the Vox pit, the latter overseeing incoming messages while Seraphiel rested a hand on his bolter. Valance studied the approaching vessel. What are they doing here? She asked quietly. Lysander shook his head. I have no idea, my lady, but interdiction doctrine is in effect. Valance glanced at him sharply. You would fire on an Astartes ship? A voice rose from the Vox pit. She is not answering hails, Lord. Lysander looked from the Viceroy to the shipmaster, then back to the wounded cruiser. Someone did, he replied. His jaw tightened. Valance held his gaze for a few seconds, then adjusted her robe over her shoulder and returned her attention to the newcomer. The Thousand Suns heavy cruiser was venting atmosphere. Battle damage scarred its entire length. 2 of its forward lance turrets had been reduced to molten ruin. The forward baffle plates of its engine section looked as though a 100-ton gun had gone to work on them. The central macro battery decks were shattered, long barrels exposed where the hull had been burned away. Glacian plating had ruptured outward along the forward gun deck where a magazine had detonated. The prow was bent and folded inward, white paint smeared across red where the ship had clearly rammed another vessel. The superstructure was pockmarked with bloated armored sections, and the observation deck lay open to the void. Hālgen rose unsteadily to his feet, staring at the carnage. That's the labyrinth paradox, he said quietly. Assigned to the 3rd Fleet. Lysander turned sharply toward him. "Third Fleet Thousand Suns are at Istvan," he said. "They're part of the War Master's armada." Luthien looked from the ships to the planet's surface. He caught a sharp glint of light where the main estuary from the ocean met the land. The capital lay somewhere in that sprawl. At night, the city became a myriad of lights, illuminating the surface like a nest of fireflies. But in daylight, all that could be seen were the wispy shadows of industrial fabricator foundries, their stacks belching steam and ash into the sky. Another sharp glint caught his eye, likely the local star reflecting from a solar collector. The city had several. He turned his gaze back to the Labyrinth Paradox. It loomed larger now, and the damage was far worse than he had first thought. "Still not answering hails," Carthus reported. Hālgen nodded coldly. He turned toward the weapons pit, his voice steady despite his wounds. "Clear macro cannon for firing, raise void shields, charge reactors for maneuvering." He nodded to Carthus. "Relay the order to the fleet." Lysander crossed to the Vox pit. "Carthus, are they receiving our hails?" Carthus held a receiver in one hand while reading a freshly printed transcript from another station. "She's taken heavy damage. Her ether antennae may be compromised." Hālgen looked up toward the astropathic dais. "Send a signal through the relay." The astropath nodded. Luthien listened to the orders, his gaze drifting from the ships back down to the planet's surface. He thought he could make out a plume of smoke rising from the estuary, perhaps one of the smaller manufactoria within the greater conurbation venting excess pressure. Possibly a fire. It happened. His Vox hissed with sudden static and he muted it, interference most likely. Then his eyes caught another flash of light. That one was definitely within the capital. He moved, crossing to the Vox pit and nodding to Carthus, who returned a tired smile. "I'm getting Vox scatter," Luthien reported. Carthus nodded. "Atmospheric interference. We're in low orbit. This usually happens at this time of day. The star is aligned directly with us." He turned back to the cogitator bank, cycling channels on his receiver, listening intently. A frown creased his scalp. Luthien rubbed at the studs embedded in his forehead. Lysander moved, pushing past a remembrancer who had drifted too close to the throne. "Hālgen, orders are to prevent any ship entering the system without clearance. I can board her before you're forced to fire. My shuttle is ready." Hālgen gave a grim smile. "At her current velocity, I doubt you'd have time, but I respect the sentiment." Seraphiel spoke without looking away from the viewport. "How do we know those orders are even correct?" Carthus answered quietly. "Remember, brother, the astropathic relay from the Thousand Suns ordered the destruction of this fleet. We have to assume that message was meant for that ship." He nodded toward the battered cruiser beyond the glass. "We must assume the Labyrinth Paradox has orders to engage us. That would explain the silence." Lysander shook his head. "We don't know who that message was intended for." Carthus opened his mouth to reply. "Auspex contact!" the sensor officer called out. Second translation point forming. Hālgen straightened. "Now what?" he snapped, then turned to the weapons pit. "I want targeting solutions between the Labyrinth Paradox and whoever that is." The rear doors opened and Valerius strode onto the bridge, his cloak billowing. Even at this distance, the light of the immaterium shimmered across his white armor in colors that refused to settle. He halted beside Lysander as both men watched the newcomer emerge. In the void, a destroyer translated into real space. Sleek lines painted sea green, the sigil of the War Master emblazoned across its hull. Lysander exhaled sharply. "That's Lupercal Infernus, a Luna's wolf ship." "Identification confirmed," reported a gunnery officer. "Hail her," Hālgen ordered, wariness creeping into his voice. "Receiving hail," came the call from the Vox pit. Carthus snatched the receiver and listened. He didn't wait for the transcript. "It's from Lupercal Infernus. We are ordered to open fire on the Labyrinth Paradox." Seraphiel looked from the weapons pit to the approaching destroyer, then back to the shipmaster. "That is a direct order." Lysander snapped back immediately. "Sons of Horus do not issue orders to Emperor's children." Hālgen slumped back into his throne, one hand returning to his wounded side. "Chain of command," he muttered, then louder. "Raise that damned ship." "Which one?" asked the deck adept. Hālgen lifted his head, eyes burning. "Both." Carthus's look of concern deepened. Luthien stepped closer. What is it? Serthus shook his head, adjusting the dial. Around them, the other Vox adepts worked with increasing urgency, speaking into casters and relaying reports. Serthus looked up at last. I'm not certain, brother, but something is unfolding planet-side. Contact with Kepri Seca is down. He paused, listening. Governor Columbanus will be making a public address shortly. It's being broadcast on all planetary defense channels. Luthien nodded. Should we report it? Not until we have something concrete, Serthus replied. Then he inclined his head toward the apothecary. Let Valerius know. Luthien stepped back, his hand tapping lightly against his weapon. He crossed past the Viceroy and Lysandor without speaking, passing the information in battle sign to Seraphiel, who acknowledged with a cautious nod, lips pursed. Reaching Valerius's side, Luthien leaned close. Not looking good, brother? Valerius waved over a servitor bearing a silver platter. He took a drink, savoring the crystal glass, then lifted a handful of grapes. No, I can see that. His gaze tracked between the two ships. The destroyer was closing rapidly on the battered heavy cruiser. He gave a short nod. Looks like our brothers have a quarrel, he said with a faint smile. Then, after a breath, brothers do quarrel sometimes, don't they? A little more than a quarrel, Luthien replied. Valerius popped a grape into his mouth and smiled again. I wonder why they aren't answering hails, he murmured, then moved to the Auspex array, nodding politely to the nearest adept before beginning his own scans. Luthien followed, but his eyes drifted back to the planet below. 2 more flashes lit the surface. He stopped, a chill crawling through him. He was about to speak when the fleet Vox station cut in. Lupercal Infernus is charging weapons. Macro cannon are being run out. Labyrinth Paradox has raised void shields, came another report. Order both ships to stand down. The Viceroy commanded. This system is under Compliance Fleet Authority. Tell them to shut down engines and prepare for inspection. Serthus looked to the shipmaster. Hālgen shrugged with a wince of pain, then nodded. Serthus sent the signal. Lysandor turned to Valence. This is madness. Valence shook her head. This is what happens when you let dogs off their leash. The Astartes should never have been left to their own devices. Seraphiel glanced at her. Until now, you've not objected to Astartes' presence. Valence smiled, her old disarming expression returning. On the contrary, Palatine guards Seraphiel. You and yours are very well house-trained. She inclined her head slightly. And well gelded. Seraphiel stiffened. Lysandor placed a calming hand on his pauldron as he took a step forward. Hālgen struck the arm of his throne. Why don't they answer? Valerius spoke quietly. They can't. I just completed a bioscan of the Labyrinth Paradox. He drew a sharp breath. There's no one alive aboard. It appears their Geller field failed in transit. Hālgen pressed a hand to his temple. Luthien asked, Then who raised their voids? Hālgen answered grimly. Automated systems. The ship detected target lock and reacted accordingly. The gunnery officer called out, Lupercal Infernus is launching boarding torpedoes. Long-range macro batteries are arming. Torpedoes are targeted on the Labyrinth Paradox, but half the macros are tracking the Compliance Fleet, including Eternity Anchor and Tertius Chalice. That's rather impolite, Valerius remarked. Luna Wolves were always impetuous, Seraphiel added. Hālgen shifted painfully in his throne, pulling his harness straps tight. Return the favor. Give me ship to ship. He waited for the channel to clear, then spoke. Lupercal Infernus, this is Shipmaster Nithiel Hālgen of the Eternity Anchor, Commodore of the Kepri Compliance Fleet. We have Viceroy Luxine Zalaran Valence aboard. Be advised, the Labyrinth Paradox is a dead hulk. Stand down your attack. This fleet is under interdiction doctrine by order of the War Master and the Emperor of Mankind. Static flooded the bridge. Valerius leaned close to Luthien. If people are choosing between War Master and Emperor, Hālgen just painted us as targets for both. Luthien whispered back, unease tightening his throat. I thought Horus and the Emperor were on the same side. Valerius nodded slowly. We're about to find out. The gunnery officer called out, Torpedoes impacting the Labyrinth Paradox in 40 seconds. I have tracking and targeting solutions. Do I intercept? That means firing on Horus's sons, Hālgen muttered. I don't think the War Master would take kindly to that. Let the dogs run, Valerius said lightly. The Labyrinth Paradox is a hulk. All those boarding parties will find are voided decks and automated defenses, he snorted. Knowing them, they'll probably kill half their own assault teams. That alone would be worth watching. Enemy weapons still locked on us, the gunnery officer reported. Hālgen rubbed his chin, considering another hail. The bridge vox crackled. A voice came through, Terran in origin but carrying the clipped consonants of Thonia. Eternity anchor. Stand your fleet down. Disengage your targeting arrays. We are here under the authority of the War Master. Hālgen raised an eyebrow. It would be an honor, he replied evenly. But you first. Valance spun on her heel. What are you doing, Nithiel? Disengage your targeting matrix. Hālgen looked back at her coolly. I will decide the actions of my ship, not you. Valance pressed. Lupercal Infernus carries Horus's seal. That holds more authority than spurious vox traffic. Hālgen gestured toward the viewport. The War Master's destroyer is currently targeting my fleet, and yourself, if you hadn't noticed. Valance scowled, turning to Lysandor. Remove the shipmaster from command. He is endangering the fleet. Lysandor placed a hand on his sword hilt. The sons of Horus won't care whether orders come from a chapter serf, fleet officer, or battle brother. The shipmaster is acting within his purview. Valance shook her head sharply and turned back toward the void. The voice returned, harsher now. Stand your gun crews down. Insistent, isn't he? Valance murmured. Hālgen settled both hands on the arms of his throne. Lower your target lock. You are one destroyer. We are a full compliance fleet, and Astartes cruiser and planetary defense assets. By all means, be a fool, but don't be a dead fool. Seconds stretched. Then the gunnery pit called, Lupercal Infernus has disengaged target lock. Valance exhaled visibly. Hālgen nodded once. Stand down, disengage targeters. The bridge released a collective breath. Luthien sagged slightly, rolling his weapon arm. Thought that was going to be awkward. Valerius braced one hand against the bulkhead. Luna wolves aren't known for brinkmanship. They don't back down. Luthien turned toward the viewport. Boarding torpedoes slammed into the labyrinth paradox, its dead hull flashing as automated defenses spat fire into the void. Lupercal Infernus swung broadside, lance batteries igniting along her flanks. A lance beam burned across the prow of an Emperor's Children destroyer. Another barely missed the Tertius Chalice. A third tore across the upper viewport and struck the superstructure of the Eternity anchor. Macro rounds followed, heavy ordnance straddling the nearest battleship. It lost station, forced into an uncontrolled turn as atmospheric drag tore at its shields. Another battleship took at least 3 impacts. One struck a magazine. Its entire forward section vanished in a cascade of light and radiation. More rounds hammered the Eternity anchor. The ship shuddered. A roof brace snapped. The upper platform cracked and collapsed. The astropath was hurled to the lower deck. The main roof section fell directly where Lysandor and Valance stood. Seraphiel dove forward, seized the Viceroy, and threw her clear. The support structure came down squarely on the Palatine guard. His armor folded. He was killed instantly. Smoke filled the bridge. They fired blind, Hālgen said hoarsely, without targeting arrays. Valerius dragged an adept clear of the shattered Auspex pit. Don't complain. That was aimed at the bridge. Thank them for their enthusiasm. Luthien lifted Valance from the deck. Her hand was twisted, clearly broken, but she lived. He turned. Lysandor's cloak hem protruded from beneath the fallen slab. Luthien clenched his jaw. Return fire, he roared. Outside, Lupercal Infernus burned hard on its thrusters, swinging its lance batteries toward the flagship. Its gun ports glowed anew. It would have been magnificent. It should have worked. But the Tertius Chalice had already broken orbit. She came about and fired. Lance beams tore through the destroyer's central hull. Plasma feedback ripped each of its triple lance turrets into the void. The ship began to roll, macro cannon blazing wildly beneath the fleet's plane, shots vanishing uselessly into the planet's atmosphere. Hālgen leaned forward against his restraints, sneering. Fire. The entire fleet answered. Trapped deep in the gravity well, Lupercal Infernus was annihilated beneath converging macro and lance fire. Tertius Chalice flared its main drives to escape the kill zone as the Sons of Horus destroyer dissolved into molten debris and ruptured reactor cores. Luthien watched as what remained fell toward the planet, already glowing with plasma as it burned apart. Viceroy Valance stood beside the throne, her broken hand cradled against her chest, as she and the shipmaster watched the wreckage descend. Moments of stillness passed. Then, from the gunnery pit, an adept called out, "Labyrinth Paradox brute force engines have shut down. Boarding crews must have disconnected the drives." Hālgen inclined his head. "Thank you." He turned slightly. "Did Lupercal Infernus launch escape pods?" An Auspex officer replied, "No, Lord. No escape pods detected, and I am reading no life signs aboard Labyrinth Paradox." Luthien leaned against the bridge rail, keeping clear of the collapsed platform. A senseless waste. Valerius stepped toward the wreckage. He had already drawn his gene seed extractor, but both Astartes were crushed beyond recovery. He stowed the device and inclined his helm. "Make that 2 senseless wastes." He looked to Luthien. "Silver lining, though. That makes you Consul Adjunct. May I be the first to congratulate you." Luthien returned a cutting glare, but Valerius was correct. He turned to the shipmaster and viceroy. "We need to report this. To someone." His eyes flicked to the dead astropath. "Route it through the planet's relay." The viceroy nodded. "Agreed, Custodian at Arms." Then she corrected herself. "Consul Adjunct Luthien." "Custodian at Arms will suffice." Carthus called from the Vox pit. "Planet-wide communication incoming." "On Voxcaster," Hālgen and Luthien said together. The bridge speakers crackled to life. Static drowned the signal for a moment, then the voice came through clearly. "This is Agrippa Laetorius Columbanus. These are troubling times, but be assured, citizens, I have secured concessions for Kepri from the War Master of the Imperium, Horus Lupercal." Hālgen and Valance exchanged glances. Valerius finished binding a wounded gunner and murmured, "Horus always did like the sound of his own name." The governor continued, "Acting in protection of the Imperium, correcting corruption among Imperial administrators, purging traitors and Xeno-sympathizers." Carthus shook his head. Valance sneered. Hālgen raised an eyebrow. Valerius washed blood from his hands. "Well, Columbanus would know about Xenos fraternization," he said lightly. "He married a nymph." Luthien turned to the planet below. It had just declared itself in rebellion against the Emperor. The governor's voice hardened. "So, in the War Master's name, I have ordered the planetary militia to arrest all compliance personnel. Orbital batteries will cleanse the void of traitor filth." Valance smiled. "Bastard." Carthus lifted his receiver. "It's spreading across fleet channels. Picket forces are declaring for the War Master." Hālgen leaned forward. "What about the compliance fleet?" Carthus listened. "Lots of traffic, mostly insults and death oaths. I think they're with us." Hālgen exhaled. "Prepare to break orbit. Those batteries could activate any moment." The governor continued. "Citizens, this day will be remembered as a great day, the day committed to the name or Horus, and forevermore." The transmission cut suddenly replaced by a droning buzz, then static. Outside, a brilliant flash erupted at the heart of the capital. Then another, each along the equatorial arc where the orbital batteries were emplaced. Hālgen rose. "Emperor's name?" Valance's wide smile returned. Explosions blossomed over Kepri Thrur. The moon seemed to shimmer as the orbital firestorm impacted the atmosphere, causing pink and blue aurora. Hālgen said, "That was the ships in orbit detonating." Luthien brought up the hololith. The deployment grid flickered. One by one, diamond-patterned signatures shifted from green to magenta. Within a minute, every picket vessel that had sworn to the War Master vanished. Valerius stepped beside him, glass in hand. "Defensive posture orders. Clever." He clapped his hands theatrically, his gauntlets clanging like bone china, placing ships in close proximity for maximum effect with lead explosives, all the while not spilling a drop of the liquid. Luthien turned on the viceroy. "You," she smiled. "Traitors. I've been intercepting rumors and warning for weeks. We all have. My own intelligence agents suspecting some form of mutiny, so I made preparations. A few charges placed aboard key ships was all it took." She turned the hem of her cloak, showing an emitter under the cloth. "You don't get to be an excellent diplomat in the Imperium without a flair for self-preservation." Hālgen stepped forward. "Not all those crews were traitors, and the capital had 12 million civilians." Valance met his gaze. "Civilians can be replaced. Humanity is good at making disposable replacements. A sacrifice is often necessary," she smiled, adding, "for the Emperor." "My crew!" Hālgen shouted, drawing his pistol. Luthien moved, dropping his weapon to move faster. Too late. Valance smashed Valerius's glass into his face, tore his plasma pistol free, and fired. Hālgen collapsed. Luthien caught the shipmaster as he fell. Holding him, he reached for his weapon, but realized he had dropped his Volkite weapon on the plinth. He looked down at Hālgen's face. The man's eyes flickered for a moment. He smiled, blood forming at the corner of his mouth, as he pulled the blade from his cloak, putting the ceremonial weapon in the Astarte's empty hand. He smiled, then his eyes went blank, his body falling limp. Caerthus drew his bolt pistol. Valance turned and fired again. The Herald Protector fell, chest burned through. She laughed. "I took your advice." She waved the pistol, a plasma gun for killing an Astartes. Valerius staggered forward, blood streaming down his cheek. She trained the pistol on him. He raised his hands. The bridge crew froze. "I am in command," Valance said, "and I will kill any traitor here in the Emperor's name." Luthien laid Hālgen's body down, pulling silk from the throne to cover him, the blade hidden by his hand. From Vox Pit, an adept called Lady Frater Prefectus Reach requesting clearance to translate. Valance grinned wide. "Granted, no reason we cannot return to normal is there. The Emperor requites order." Another voice. "Lost contact with Echo of Exaltation." Her smile faded. "Then reacquire it." A second adept, hand shaking with a transcript, said, "Cruiser Gloria Palatina and Battleship Canticle of Perfection not responding." She lifted the small detonator. "More traitors." Another adept, voice breaking as she reported, said, "I was receiving telemetry from Rapture Unending. Then the Vox reported poisoning. Then silence. I cannot raise them." Valance frowned. "Poisoned?" Luthien rose slowly. Valance aimed at him. Valerius spoke softly. "Wasteful." Valance laughed. "You think you'd do better?" Valerius pulled a cloth from a platter held by a servitor, dabbed blood from his lips. "Virus bombs across fleet systems. Remove unwanted crew, clean ships, a complete armada, ready for your Emperor." Her eyes twitched. "And how would you manage that?" Luthien readied the blade. Valerius smiled. "When you're an apothecary inspecting vital assets, access is trivial." Valance turned toward the planet. Other than the rings of the explosions, there were now green clouds rolling outwards from the now abandoned Navis Astra positions. As the planet turned gently, the night side came into view. Whereas before the nighttime city lights had illuminated the darkened surface, there were now no lights. Only the dim green clouds slowly spreading like dark ink, as if blotting out the illumination from the smaller towns and farmsteads as it spread like a cancer, devouring the light as it did the citizens. Valerius murmured, "That was my plan. A gift for the War Master." She swung the pistol back. Luthien dove. The plasma round tore into him. Valerius caught him as he fell, grabbed the serving platter, and flung it. It embedded in Valance's skull. She dropped without a sound. Her body rolled down the plinth, coming to rest with a pool of red growing under her. Valerius held Luthien close. Luthien looked up at the apothecary. He smiled. "You a traitor, brother?" Steam rose from his armor as sealant foam cascaded from the fatal wound. "I hoped you'd join me, brother." Luthien continued to smile. His eyes glazed over, and the body went limp. Yellow mist poured from the vents. Crew screamed, throats burned, eyes boiled. Valerius eased Luthien down gently. Then he reached for his helm. His plan was simple. A shuttle, a destroyer. 3 months at full burn, and he would arrive at the closest world under the War Master's control without need for a navigator, no loose ends. He would arrive bearing a gift of a dead fleet and a world ready for plunder. He made to strand. Only then did he feel the blade in his side. He smiled. "Well done, brother." Above Kepri, the Eternity anchor continued its orbit. The heresy had only just begun. Already, worlds were vanishing faster than they could be named. Kepri would receive no epitaph. Its fall would be reduced to a reference code and a margin note in an administratum archive, stored on a forgotten shelf in a forgotten library, on a world that would itself one day burn. History would move on. A dead fleet, over a dead world, in a dead system.